The World Affairs Council of Greater Reading is the leading educational organization promoting understanding and enlightenment on global issues. I am Mike Sutton. I'll be your host again this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining. There's going to be a great presentation today, another one in our series of great decisions brought to us by the Foreign Policy Association. Thank you so much for joining. If you are watching on Facebook, or if you have a Facebook account and you're joining us on Zoom, please head over to Facebook and like and share the post for today's video so that we can get as many people to be able to get access to this content as possible. Great way to support the organization. Also a great time to renew your membership. We are still bringing this content to our members and want to be able to have this interactive format like we're doing right now. So getting those membership renewals in is important as well. I will remind everyone that I've got you all muted for the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will do a live Q&A with Dr. Ghosh, so please enter your questions into the chat as we go. Or if you'd like to join us using your computer's camera and microphone, you can let me know that in chat as well, and we'll try and get you looped in here. Otherwise, I'll just read your questions on during the Q&A. Again, if you want to join live, just let me know through the chat. We do have about a 25-minute video to get us started. I will be playing that in just a few moments. Following that video, I'll bring on our president to introduce our speaker. Let me just get this video set up here. All right, enjoy the video. I'll be back in about 25 minutes.
In the spring of 2019, over the course of 39 days, citizens of the world's largest democracy took to the polls. When it was all over, some 600 million voters had delivered a dramatic result, an electoral landslide for the polarizing incumbent. With an unprecedented parliamentary majority behind him, can Narendra Modi deliver on the economic promises that carried him to power, or will his strident brand of Hindu nationalism undermine India's secular democracy? India and Pakistan, next on Great Decisions.
Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP and the Nelson B. Delavan Foundation.
India is the world's largest democracy and a beacon for freedom in an increasingly authoritarian region.
India is the largest democracy in the world, and it is among also one of the poorer countries. In that context, India is very important.
It's a country which has the second largest Muslim population in the world. It has one of the oldest Jewish populations, the oldest Jewish, religious places in the world. It has a significant Christian population. You have all kinds of religion. We've had a woman prime minister. They've had a Sikh prime minister. You've had all religions represented.
In 1975, India amended its constitution, establishing a secular democratic republic. Modi's critics charge that he is undermining this tradition.
We are going to ensure Modi government get a taste of what it would happen to betray young India.
The Indian Constitution, which was finished just a few years after Indian independence, was a very bold effort to turn around many of the inequalities of India, to establish a democratic system, and to call India a secular nation.
Right from the 1950s, there has been a grassroots movement of creating a large-scale Hindu identity that would be reflected in politics.
There's a strand of Hindu nationalism that is always there, and let's not forget that it was actually this group called RSS, Rashtriya Sevak Sangh, and the member of that group that kills Mahatma Gandhi. And it is because they feel that Gandhi is against the Hindu majority nation. And then Modi comes along, who has been a member of RSS.
What had been the feeling among a lot of the Hindus was that the Congress party had gone too far in the other direction and the majority was being undermined. And that is the sort of view that the Modi government actually picked up.
In an era of resurgent nationalism worldwide, Modi has embraced a Hindu nationalist ideology.
The broader trend in the world has given him every incentive to just say, well, I might as well just be an totally unconstrained Hindu nationalist, because that's kind of what I see around me. I see Xi Jinping up here, I see Donald Trump over there, I see Vladimir Putin up there. This is what's happening, and so I'm just going to be one of these strongmen.
All this madness and frenzy is being driven by a new philosophy or a new doctrine, which is ascendant in India right now. It is called Hindutva, a reincarnation of fascism in the 21st century. They want a pure India, pure South Asia, where there would be no Muslims, no Christians, no Sikhs, no Buddhists.
My belief is that he overall does not want India to become a basket case like most ethno-religious states become. And that while he's relying on it, and it might be a dangerous game, that he's not going to start enshrining policies and make changes that fundamentally damage India's democracy or make it unsafe for minorities to be citizens in India.
The Indian National Congress, which long dominated Indian politics, now controls so few seats that it is not even eligible to become the official opposition party.
It was Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Gandhi, who was some of the original ideology and the ideas of the Congress Party. But it was, on the political side, it was the Nehru family. It was Jawaharlal Nehru, the first prime minister he became after independence. Now, what happened is from Nehru's time until really not so long ago by historical standards, the Congress Party dominated Indian politics.
The Congress Party under Indira Gandhi tried to centralize rule in a federal country, intervened in local level politics in a way that absolutely backfired.
Part of the reason for Modi's resounding success has as much to do with weakness of the Congress Party.
India's nationalist turn has sent shockwaves throughout South Asia, bringing the possibility of renewed conflict into a region where the two main players, India and Pakistan, are both nuclear powers.
When India became independent of the British Empire, the arrangement under which it became independent is that the Muslim majority states of India would be part of Pakistan, and the Hindu parts of India would be part of India. That's the origin of the crisis, but over which now 3 wars have been fought. A lot of terrorist infiltration has happened. A very, very significant problem, and one that continues to menace.
Even a limited engagement between India and Pakistan could escalate to the nuclear level and could lead to an Armageddon, in fact, which would be disastrous not just for the two countries, India and Pakistan, but for the entire globe.
Positioned on the border between India and Pakistan, Kashmir is at the crossroads of Indian nationalist politics and foreign policy.
The Indian Constitution devised a federal system of states, very much in the way that the United States is. Kashmir was born at the time of independence in a region of the country which was primarily Muslim. Kashmir kept a special status all of these years. So the article that governed them, Article 370 of the Constitution, gave Kashmir autonomy in a way that the other states did not have.
The United Nations Security Council mandated that the future of the state would be decided by its own people through a referendum under the auspices of the United Nations. That referendum was agreed by India and Pakistan, but later on, India reneged, and up to this day, the Security Council resolutions have not been implemented.
You have the RSS, this Hindu nationalist vanguard that sees it as the expression of a very, I think, ugly and sectarian form of politics. Those are people who've never liked the autonomy arrangement for Kashmir and have always wanted to seize control of Kashmir and take a more belligerent approach towards Pakistan.
The issue came to a head in August of 2019 when Modi revoked Article 370, which had allowed Kashmir a large degree of autonomy.
Whether you like it or not, it's fully within their national rights, and no one in this country that I can think of is going to challenge that.
The situation in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir is horrendous. August the 5th, India invaded the territory. It reoccupied the territory. It tried to establish its direct writ over the territory, and this territory doesn't belong to India, and they have tried to colonize it. They announced that from that point onwards, the basic inalienable rights of the Kashmiris would be taken away.
This kind of sense that strongman politics is the trend. It leads to things like what we're seeing in Kashmir.
Part of Modi's appeal is his promise to spur economic growth in a country where more than 250 million people live on less than $2 a day. India has bounced on and off the list of the fastest-growing global economies.
The growth rate during the 5 years was 7.5%. That is very respectable growth rate for a large democracy such as India.
We saw with Modi, he was kind of moving in two contradictory directions. There was a part of him that wanted to be this kind of reformer, who was going to modernize India, evolve its economy, and play a greater role on the world stage. And then there was this kind of unreconstructed Hindu nationalism that's very belligerent and has roots in, frankly, fascism.
The Indian economy has very, very high points. We know about high tech, the fact that it's attracted American companies for their call centers. The Indian educated classes have command of English, and so they are a natural partner for a very, very many American enterprises.
Despite its success, India's growth has not benefited everyone. Uneven economic development has exacerbated a deep divide between rich and poor.
I don't want to fall into stereotypes because, in other words, then everybody says India is a bunch of poor people groveling around. But there are people actually who are so poor that they eat the rice out of a rat's body. And that's not a fairy tale.
The Indian poor, even if they have come up from where they were, still remain extremely poor. Whereas the Indian rich, the 0.1%, are rich by global standards.
If the economy grows, there is always going to be a trickle-down effect to everybody, especially if it continues to grow at 6, 7, 8, preferably 8 to 9% a year. Then it starts growing because if you become a $5 trillion economy, the government has a lot of resources to help with social programs to bring in the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid up above.
Both Indian and foreign investors are worried that corruption and red tape continue to hinder innovation. The Modi government has made headway addressing these issues, but there is still much more to do.
It's referred to as license Raj, that it was something almost exported from the UK, imposed during the age of imperialism, this system of bureaucracy, and then given its own Indian characteristics, and that it still very much complicates and inhibits some of the faster growth.
Historically, I would say corruption and red tape have been a real drag. I mean, if you look, why was India such a low number in terms of basis of ease of doing business? Corruption has seeped into every aspect of India.
The government in recent years has done a pretty good job of moving most auctions of government resources to relatively transparent online and a little bit more hands-off. But when you get outside of the main lanes, the central government, the size of deals that the government pays a lot of attention to, that's where corruption and transparency still remains an issue.
Increasingly, India is competing with China for regional influence. Just 3 days after the Indian election, China's vice president hurried to Pakistan. China has committed more than $60 billion to construct an economic corridor in Pakistan, and Modi's victory demanded a show of solidarity.
Pakistan is China's secondary deterrent to India. As long as India and Pakistan are in conflict, 500,000 Indian troops will be on the Pakistan-India border and therefore not free to be on the China-India border. So Therefore, China has a long-term partnership with Pakistan. It helped Pakistan with its nuclear weapons and with its missile design, etc., all because it wants Pakistan to remain at loggerheads with India.
On the other hand, they recognize that India is a much larger economic behemoth that they must work with because there is a huge amount of trade involved. And Modi and Xi have made many more times than Modi and Trump.
China has challenged India's influence in several other nearby countries, including Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Modi shows no sign of backing down.
Well, look, it's a battle for influence and primacy in that part of the world. And India and China and the United States and others are really competing quite furiously.
China has a long-term strategy of containing India's influence in its immediate neighborhood. The former Sri Lankan government gave the Chinese a lot of concessions. The Chinese built a huge port. Unfortunately, that port is not commercially productive. So the Chinese then said, okay, because we have lent you so much money, we'll take that over. That enables the Chinese to have a foothold for any future military plans that they might have.
They're building a new port in Gwadar, Pakistan. They attempted to dive in deep in Maldives, potentially acquiring an island in the Maldives right in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So India looks around and sees an increased China presence. And when they look around their own neighborhood and see that China has made real inroads in the Indian Ocean region, it gives them some concern.
In the private sector, competition between China and India is intense.
We've seen India has been one of the bright spots in the global economy leading up to the trade war. And many have talked about India being the next China.
It breaks down pretty closely between the fact that India has a pretty strong internationally competitive services sector. Think of IT services, think of call centers, think of software development. Think of Hollywood and Bollywood. Think of the ability to produce films and television content that's viewed as, at the leading edge of it is viewed world-class today. China still is a much more attractive destination for manufacturing investment. The fact that you've got terrific infrastructure, you've got a relatively stable regulatory environment, you have provincial leaders in China that seem to want and run after and try to attract investment.
India faces a number of obstacles. GDP growth isn't in the double digits. It's 7% at most. It's not quite at the 12 to 13% that China even enjoyed as recently as 10 years ago. One of the reasons why India struggles is because of infrastructure. A second one is simply the labor market, that India's labor market remains heavily regulated. And then a third factor that sort of has slowed India's rise is the fact that it hasn't invested sufficiently in its own human development. So we haven't seen high levels of investment in education. Literacy rates still lag China's by a considerable amount.
It remains to be seen whether India and the U.S. can work together to bring stability and prosperity to South Asia. The countries have many shared goals, but a rocky history of cooperation.
We're two democracies. It's a oft-used phrase, but the United States is the oldest democracy in the world, and India is the largest.
20 years ago, the U.S.-India relationship was in a bad place. India had tested a nuclear weapon. The United States had put sanctions on India and Pakistan, which had done the same thing. I think almost immediately, American leaders realized maybe sanctioning India, the world's largest democracy, a country where we have a huge diaspora population in the United States, a whole bunch of technical talent, a big future market, maybe that's not the right way to go.
India is so big that it has its own inertia, and the result of that is they can do a lot of things without having to reach out, which other countries have to do. That gives some real benefits to India, and for that matter, in our dealing with India. So we want them as a partner, they want us as a partner, and it's been a good relationship in recent times.
India and the U.S. regarded one another with suspicion throughout the Cold War.
After independence, we lined up quite strongly behind India. President Truman and President Eisenhower were actually quite enthused, not sure which way India would go. Would it be aligned with the West? Would it be aligned with a growing Soviet power, or would it take its own course?
We have an interest in a stable, growing subcontinent. And therefore, when we discuss aid with India, it is not in the context of India asking us for a special favor, but of defining joint objectives.
President Nixon became enamored of Pakistan when he visited Pakistan as vice president way back in 1953. He went to India and asked the Indians to join America against the Soviets, and the Indians said, why should we? We want to be non-aligned. President Nixon interpreted that as India wanting to be neutral. India said, no, it's not neutrality. Non-alignment means we will get from the Soviets what we need, and we will get from you what we need.
But now, the rapidly growing economic relationship is bringing Washington and New Delhi closer together.
President Clinton wanted to have a different relationship with India. He was very skillful in helping to negotiate between India and Pakistan, and then he made a very historic visit to India in the year 2000. He was warmly welcomed. He said it was time for a different U.S.-India relationship.
I do believe if we can lead the region, or you can, away from the proliferation of dangerous weapons toward the proliferation of new ideas, new companies, and new technologies, away from the kind of racial and ethnic tensions that we see now in the trouble spots in South Asia, toward the sort of harmony I saw in that little village yesterday, then the dreams that your chief minister spoke of are well within your grasp.
India had to open up. That was number one, because they realized a closed socialist system is not working. So when they opened up, which was the country which had the largest dynamic economy, which was United States. So there were synergies, the shared values, democracy, capitalism, rule of law.
Obviously, India is a huge nation and works as a balance to China as we continue forward.
In 2016, the Obama administration named India a major defense partner, the only country to receive such a designation. The idea was to use closer ties to balance China's expansion.
Major defense partner was this unique designation we have given to no other country that recognizes the role that India plays, again, as a democratic powerhouse that supports a free and open Indo-Pacific, but yet doesn't want to be a treaty ally.
Bringing India into discussions about security issues in the Asia-Pacific, was a piece of this. It wasn't to kind of keep China down. It was to try to have the capacity to shape the context in which China is going to inevitably be playing a greater role.
India is one of the largest buyers of defense equipment, and the United States happens to be one of the largest exporters of defense equipment, state-of-the-art technology. And so I think those things have kind of brought the two countries together.
Donald Trump has shifted towards a more transactional relationship with India. The long-term impact remains unclear.
We have many things to discuss. One of them, and perhaps in our case, one of the biggest ones, is trade. The relationship has never been better, I say, than it is right now.
But President Trump's global trade war is a source of anxiety.
I think the Trump administration has recognized the importance of India to the United States, and I think that they have made a very positive effort to try to cultivate that relationship, and going forward, I think they'll do more.
I would say from the year 2000 through the end of 2017 into early 2018, there was a common architecture about the United States' approach to India. President Trump has decided to reverse that formula. Trade and investment, certain transactionalism has become more important. And that's just his approach. I think he's running and implementing this policy based on what he thinks he heard from the American people.
Right now, I think you've got the relationship moving on two different paths. So on defense and security, we've managed to sign a number of new agreements that allow our militaries to work more closely together. The downside is we have an administration in the United States that seems to be fighting a trade war against the world.
Trump's pledge to reform the visa process for highly skilled guest workers has also roiled many critics in India.
You know, the H-1B program for people who are not as familiar, it's supposed to allow companies in the United States, when they cannot find American workers despite a lot of effort. President Trump is focused on it because I would say there have been some abuses of the program. But the reality is, in this country, in the technology world, in the biotechnology world, the pharma world, healthcare world, we need talent.
It's not purely political also, there's economic significance to it because India is a major supplier of IT services to the United States, and these H-1B visas are therefore helpful for them to build the bridge to be able to bring some of their tech workers here.
It's no surprise that the president has gone after this. I think it fits into his political narrative about cracking down on immigration. I don't think he cares whether you're coming from India or South America or Africa or other parts of Asia. I think he's looking to limit the number of foreign-born people outside of Europe who are coming to the United States, and I think this, unfortunately, fits into that narrative. And when I think about my dad's own story of showing up in New York City with 14 bucks in a bus ticket, and I could go back and represent the United States as ambassador 50 years later, that's an American story, and I hope we don't lose that in our kind of current fight to limit immigration to the United States.
Going forward, policymakers must determine whether Modi's India, bold, confrontational, and poised for dramatic growth, can be a reliable partner in a dangerous region.
Great Decisions is America's largest discussion program on global affairs. Discussion groups meet in community centers, libraries, places of worship, and homes across the country to discuss global issues with their community. Participants read the 8-topic briefing book, meet to discuss each topic, and complete a ballot, which shares their views with Congress. To start or join a discussion group in your community, visit fba.org. or call 1-800-477-5836. Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP and the Nelson B. Delavan Foundation.
Let the credits run here. Once again, thanks so much to the Foreign Policy Association for allowing us to run these presentations as part of our series. We normally are doing Great Decisions, sponsoring it at local venues throughout the county, but obviously that's been curtailed a bit. So we're excited and grateful to be able to share this content and to get so many great speakers. Another good opportunity to remind you that if we're going to have a live Q&A at the end of the presentation today, so if you've got questions or if you'd like to join live, then put that into the chat to get my attention. I will try to keep as many of you involved as possible. And if you enjoy the programming, please head over to wacreading.org/join to see how you can get more involved to help us continue to deliver not just programming like this, but also to support the student programs that we have running, such as the Alan Miller Esquire Scholarship Program and the World Quest that we run every year. All great programs that we can only run with our members. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to the president of the World Affairs Council of Greater Reading, Lynn Brown.
Okay, Mike, thanks so much. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We're really pleased you're with us. Dr. Sudip Ghosh is the Associate Professor of Business at Penn State Berks, and he's about to begin his 15th year in that role. He's also the Business Program Chair, and his current research includes corporate governance, financial intermediation, e-commerce and inflation, mergers and acquisitions. Over the years, he's published many and co-authored many articles in reputable economic and finance journals. Most recently, he's published an article in the Journal of Financial Regulation and Compliance with 2 other co-authors. Dr. Ghosh, we're delighted you're with us today. Thanks so much for joining us.
You might need to unmute yourself, Dr. Ghosh. You still there?
You hear me now?
There we go.
We got you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, the floor is yours.
Okay. Just to, again, I really appreciate the opportunity, and again, thank you for letting me speak at the World Affairs Council. This is a topic of India and Pakistan is dear to my heart. And again, I'm not an expert in that field, and I'll try to do the best I can, citing some literature across the board, and hopefully you will get something from this discussion as we move forward. So just to give you a little brief, I think I'm going to go with the PowerPoint so that it would be easier for you to follow what I'm saying. Again, this is Pakistan and India, two nations which both has nuclear power and has been the flashpoint in South Asia. And there has been the relation between India and Pakistan has been really tumultuous for the last 50 years, including last week when I heard that there were skirmishes in the Kashmir border. And as of 2 days earlier, we also had skirmish in the Chinese border. So India is fighting the Pakistanis in the northwest, at the Kashmir, and also trying to ward off the Chinese in the northeastern part of Kashmir.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Ghosh, but if you mean to be sharing your video, we're not seeing your presentation right now.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you not see the PowerPoint? Let me just share it with you folks here real quick. Okay, so this is where we are.
Now we see it. Yes, sir.
Okay, so again, when we look at India, if we, since India has been independent from 1947, so over 72 years, and in the 50 out of the 70 years, it was ruled by the popular Indian National Congress. And the first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru of India, really did not like capitalism because it saw the dark days of capitalism through colonialism and through industrialization, and how Indian resources were tapped and Indian raw materials and labor were also, tend to be exploited. So capitalism was, or free market economy was not part of his deal. And he accepted was what we mostly call a socialistic pattern of society based on Fabian economic theories or Fabian principles about social equality or socialism. And it has been ridiculed in the West, especially during the Congress Raj or during the Congress rule for over 50 years. India's growth happened to be at between 2.2 to 3%, which was called the Hindu rate of growth, and which was ridiculed by the West. And as of now, when we speak in 2020, India's GDP is the 5th largest in the world. It's 2.94 trillion. And the current BJP government, although there have been a lot of criticism about this Hindu chauvinistic ruler or Modi government, the economic growth has been one of the high points of Modi's first 5 years. According to, I think in the video we saw Arvind Panagaria, a professor from Columbia, is making a remark that we have a 7.5% growth, which was remarkable for a country which happened to be the largest democracy. Over the last 6 years, we also see some economic reform. The first one was Make in India, so emphasis of making goods produced in India. So that was one of the important things. Also demonetization. Demonetization was basically targeted to minimize corruption and also to make business transactions more transparent. And when I visited India right after demonetization, and you could see bags of untapped cash, the $1,000 and $500, 500 rupee bills were thrown on the curbside, thrown in dumpsters because people has amassed so much black money they didn't know how to get rid of it. And overnight, when the money was, when those currencies were deemed redundant, people had no choice. And the ones, especially the ones with too much black money, because we have a big tertiary sector in India where it's all cash transaction. And once you do cash, there is obviously no record. So in my opinion, I think demonetization has tried to reduce corruption. It may have eliminated 10 to 15% of corruption, but it is still the right choice, the right thing to do, and the right, the Indian government made the right move. Goods and service tax, again, we made it, instead of having 5 different tiers of taxation, they introduced the GST, and it's making tax system much more transparent. So in that sense, it is also making it better that, the tax is more visible, it's becoming more transparent. And the other thing that is one of the big reforms that the Modi government did is the introduction of biometrics or Aadhaar card. And this is specially designed for, again, the poorest of the poor. So once you have the Aadhaar card and PAN card, you're eligible of opening of bank accounts where the money is going to come directly from the central government. It is equivalent of the federal government. So we thus eliminating any of the middlemen with the money were obviously siphoned. So if you're destined to send $100 to somebody, he or she ends up getting only $25 because $75 have been taken by the middleman and the people who started the whole process. So definitely Aadhaar card was also a move in the right direction. In terms of social reform, one of the things that the video or the paper did not indicate, that abolition of triple talaq. Especially India has the second largest Muslim population in the world. India, in fact, has more Muslims than Pakistan. And one of the things was, one of the part of the Muslim society was that you can if you're not unhappy with your spouse, especially with your wife, all you have to do is say talaq, which is we want divorce 3 times, or in recent days, people even texted talaq 3 times and the marriage is basically annulled. But the Indian government said that is absolutely, we are marginalizing the Muslim women in that sense. And one of the striking evidence from the vote, that I had a lot of Muslim friends in India, a lot of the younger women and especially Muslim men who had younger daughter, marriages age daughter, they actually went and supported the Modi government. They actually supported, against, they actually supported the triple talaq rule. And obviously right to education had always been in the forefront, and that had made India. Just to give you a historical perspective, that this is again a recent data I saw in terms of Korea and Japan, Korea and India. In 1960s, the per capita GDP in South Korea and India were almost synonymous, but because of the closed economic system and the policies pursued by the Indian National Congress for over 50 years, this is where we landed. This is where we are, and this is where South Korea is. So that gives you a quick understanding as to what the license Raj, I think in one of the videos that they talked about, the license Raj and the constriction of the economic system, and not accepting market capitalism or believing in the socialistic pattern of society in the long haul did to the Indian economic system. The one other graph may be of importance. If you look at India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, along the subcontinent. This is the per capita GDP from 1990, since the Indian economy has opened up, and thanks to globalization, this is what if we use the PPP approach, this is what the Indian GDP looks like. This is where Pakistan is, and this is where Bangladesh. And I think the Bangladesh economy in the last 2 years has actually surpassed the Pakistani economy in terms of GDP valuation. This is the economic growth in the last 10 years or so. And this is where Modi came into power to 2014. And this is what we experienced in terms of economic growth. On an average, we experienced about 7.5%. The last 2 years has been a little challenging. 2018 and 2019 was not good for the Indian economic system. Okay, so just to, since Pakistan is a Kashmir issue and Article 370 is a big part of this presentation, I thought I'm going to spend a little bit of time. This is prior to Indian partition of India. And like I said, we have the second largest Muslim population in India. And also we have more Muslims in India than in Pakistan. In fact, Pervez Musharraf, he came to India in 2018. There is a summer tour by India. Today there is a paper and they bring in dignitaries from all over the world. And Pervez Musharraf was there. And there was actually a member of the parliament. He was actually a Muslim guy from Lucknow. And he pointed out that you do not need to instigate Muslims in either India or Pakistan, because we are better off where we are rather than being in Pakistan. So again, this was again one of the presentations that was made. And we have seen unrest between Hindus and Muslims and communal tension. And this is the father of Pakistan, Said Muhammad Ali Jinnah. It is time that the British government applied their mind definitely to the division of India and the establishment of Pakistan and Hindustan. This was said in 1945. So the two-nation theory was formed, and on the basis of religion, Indians, I think the two states that were impacted the most, one of them which I come from is Kolkata or Calcutta, which was part of the Greater Bengal, and then Punjab, because we had a sizable Muslim population in the pre-partition days. Also, one of the things I would like to point out that during the partition, the Hindu population in in Pakistan was approximately 12.9%. And as of 2001 census, that number has gone down to 1.6%. So from 12.9 to 1.6, which is a drastic decline of the minorities in Pakistan. And on the flip side, if you look at the Muslim population, which happened to be around 10%, now it's between 17 and 20%. We don't know what the actual numbers are. Again, partition of India, partition marked one of the tragic days in the India-Pakistan relationship, and obviously there were a lot of bloodshed, a lot of acrimony between Pakistan and India, and also Hindus and Muslims. So just to give you a backdrop as to what happened with Article 370 and how it came into existence. In 1947, when India became independent, Kashmir was there were 550 domiciled states in India. So they were independent kingdoms. And Hari Singh was the king or the Maharaja of Kashmir. And he was a Hindu king, and most of his subjects were actually Muslim. So initially he wanted an independent India. He didn't want to go with Pakistan, neither he wanted to go with India. So he signed what is called a standstill treaty with the Pakistan government. And it was meant for commerce, trade, and for travel between the newly created Pakistan and Kashmiris in Kashmir. But on October 22nd, all of a sudden the Pakistani army, along with the Pashtuns and tribals, attacked and invaded the so-called newly formed Kashmir under the tutelage of Shuja Nawaz. He was the brother of one of the governors of Pakistan, and so Hari Singh was desperate, and what he did, he sent Sheikh Abdullah. He was one of the powerful political leader in Kashmir to India, and since India had no standstill agreement with Pakistan, India said, okay, we can help you, but you have to sign the instrument of accession, which was signed either on October 26th or October 25th. I'm not sure what the actual date was because there is a controversy. And this is the document that aligns Kashmir with India. And right after that, the Indians airlifted military personnel and somehow protected, because the Kashmiri army almost came knocking at the door of close to Srinagar, which happened to be the capital. And then the Indian army, along with the Kashmiris, somehow managed to thwart or stop the Pakistani invasion. And then Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister, he went to United Nations Security Council, which is popularly known as Resolution 47. And according to United Nations, they can have a plebiscite only if it's a free Kashmir. Again, the plebiscite with the Kashmiris, if it's completely devoid of either Pakistanis on the northwest or the Indians on the east. But the Pakistanis never left. And to that extent, when I was listening to the tape, that Masood Khan, the minister of Azad Kashmir, he said that this was an annexation of India administered Kashmir. That is never the case, because Pakistan was the first to start the invasion. They never left, they occupied, and so the whole idea of free and fair plebiscite among the Kashmiris was never came into prominence, even from day one, from October 22nd. So this is what happened. I'm sorry, let me. Okay, I'm sorry, I need to get back. Oh, what did I do now? Hold on. I need to show you this is the new Kashmir after Article 370 has been revoked or abrogated. So on August 5th, and again this Article 370, before that, this instrument of accession led to what we call the Article 370. Okay, so when India's parliament, India's constitution was enacted in 1950, Pakistan. Okay, so when India's constitution was enacted, was promulgated on 1950, Article 370 came into existence. The main reason of Article 370 is, these are the provisions of Article 370. They had a separate, Kashmiris can have a separate constitution, which is not granted to any other state. They can have a separate flag. Unlike the US, every state can have a flag. India, you cannot have a separate flag. Everything is under the Indian flag. And independence over all matters, except for communication, defense, and external affairs, has to be managed by the Indian government. Everything else, it was basically administered. It was given, the Kashmiri government was given the authority to run. And within that, Article 370, people are only talking about Article 370. There was a provision which is called Provision 35A. And this is also very restrictive. So I need to go over this. So the provision 35A, what it did, it disallowed any non-Kashmiris to buy any land in Kashmir. So if you are from New Delhi, if you are from Bengal, if you are from Chennai, if you are from Hyderabad, you cannot buy any piece of land or commerce in Kashmir. And also, if you are a Kashmiri, you can actually be able to buy anywhere you want. So again, there was a double standard. And to top it off, any women of Kashmiri origin, if they married somebody outside who was not Kashmiri, is going to clearly, lose that right or privilege. However, if you are a man of Kashmiri origin and if you marry somebody outside of Kashmir, your privilege will still be intact. So again, there is a double standard we are seeing. Going back to a couple of things here, the relationship between India and Pakistan since 1947. Again, we have a line of control between India and Pakistan since 1949. There have been 3 wars have been waged between India and Pakistan, and the Pakistan army has always been very successful in blaming India that they are the one who started the war. As a matter of fact, each and every time it was the Pakistanis that instigated and started the whole affair, the war. With regards to Pakistan, why am I saying that? I mean, Pakistan is basically an ideological state, which is said that it's for, by, and of Muslims. And we are in a serious competition and in a serious civilization competition with Hindu India. And this is, according to Christine Fair, she is a professor at Georgetown University, very renowned India-Pakistan expert. And they have this nation of rhetoric of a two-nation theory, and with they teach in schools and madrasas that India doesn't accept Pakistan, which is again completely unfair and untrue. In addition to that, a few other things that also needs to be mentioned, that if Pakistan was more of a non-ideological state, what would have happened? They could have had a functional economic relationship with India, where Pakistan can improve and also India can improve. So, India, since being the 5th largest economy, if you have a good sense of trade and commerce and exchange, both countries can benefit. But unfortunately, since it's an ideological state, that is not what they want. And if we can have any kind of economic normalization, that would be good for Pakistan and also would be good for India. In fact, there is a saying in Pakistan, and this is again to Christine Fair, that some countries have an army, and in Pakistan, Pakistani army has the country. So in terms of foreign policy, they dictate. In terms of budget allotment, they get the lion's share, and whatever is unaccounted for or whatever the Pakistani government need after they fulfill the needs of the Pakistani army is basically filled by either World Bank, US assistance, and they have realized that we can get all kinds of foreign assistance, whatever the shortfall in our budgets are. And this has been going on for last 70 so years. And then Pakistani army basically wants the instability in Kashmir because that is their bread and butter. Pakistani army is not there to defend the country; they are there to rule the country, and that's what make it so difficult that the Kashmir issue can never be amicably solved, because we have the Pakistani army basically and with the ISI, their intelligence, and their intelligence also supports groups like and train people in Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and they have been responsible for all these attacks in India, Indian Parliament, the Mumbai attack. And in 2019, I was in India when this attack happened. Out of nowhere, this JEM or Jaish-e-Mohammed suicide squad came in to Pakistan, came into Kashmir, and they killed 42 Indian soldiers. And India responded immediately. India responded with an air attack, air assault. One of the pilots were captured, but thankfully he was actually unharmed and sent back to India.
Dr. Ghosh, do you mind if we insert a question from the chat
Yeah,
here?
sure, please.
So coming off the tail of the partitions, obviously a contentious relationship, arguably good reasons for the partition. David Carroll asks, was there really ever a path for India to remain a unified country?
A really interesting question. In fact, Gandhi never wanted a separate India. Gandhi never wanted a separate India. The whole identity of Muslim minority and Hindu majority was actually dates back during the British Raj or British rule, because the Muslims in India were always given a separate plebiscite other than the other than the Hindus. So there was always a parallel social system for Hindus and for Muslims. And so that led to the formation of Muslim minority, and again, people like Jinnah and Nehru, they decided that, and Patel and Vallabhbhai Patel, they decided that maybe it's a good idea to have a separate India and a separate Pakistan. India, obviously on ethnic lines of, ethnocentric lines, either Hindus for India and Muslims for Pakistan.
Are there models or other situations in the world that we could look at to have a sense of what that might have looked like?
I think we can go back to Turkey and Greece. If there have been absolute, clear demarcation of only Hindus living in India and only Muslims living in Pakistan, I think that probably, because we see in Greece and Turkey, after the exchange, they don't have any tension or anything. I mean, it's the same culture, divided by a geographical border.
And you talked a little bit about how India's got the largest democracy, they've got the 5th largest GDP, but at the same time, very low GDP growth and very low GDP per capita. Has any of that situation been driven by the partition, or how can we understand that?
I think the GDP per capita is low because, we started on we basically shunned any kind of capitalistic or market economic system. We followed the Russian model. So when I was growing up in India, we have this 5-year plan. And then every 5 year, and the main emphasis were only on heavy industry, the chemical, steel plants, chemical plants, and most of the heavy industrialization. And there was absolutely no emphasis on consumer market or goods and services produced, consumed by consumers. So the consumer market was completely ignored, and that basically is the basis or engine for growth for a capitalistic system. And the whole emphasis was only on industrialization of heavy industry, like chemical, industrial, steel plants, heavy industries.
And
so
do you mind if we
probably tend to reduce the growth?
Yeah. Do you mind if we stick with the Q&A for a little bit here?
Is that?
Do you mind if we stick with the Q&A a little bit here?
Yeah. No problem. Absolutely.
Okay. So you mentioned industry. I know, like Bangladesh in particular, very strongly dependent on the textile industry, which is getting hit particularly hard with the COVID crisis. They're getting stuck with a lot of inventory. I imagine other manufacturing industries are seeing the same thing. So I guess the combination of, did they already have a plan to address the slow GDP growth, and what do you see happening as a result of the current situation?
I think when Modi government inherited an economy which was really struggling, okay, in 2011, and what happened was, so they came about because as we have seen in the video, that corruption is instilled in different in different sectors of India. I mean, in every facet of India, we have this license Raj and corruption, which we inherited again from the English. So to ward off or reduce some of those corruption, the Modi government started with this Aadhaar card. So if you have the biometrics and if you do not know how to read and write, which unfortunately at least 15% of Indians do not know even how to write their name, they can use their fingerprint and they would get their iris, taken picture of their iris and be put in a card with their picture, obviously. And they can be able to open up a bank account. So whenever, even during the COVID crisis, the Indian government distributed about 25 billion, equivalent of $25 billion, which doesn't seem much by the US standard, but it's a lot for, for people who's making $2 a day. And this helped to eliminate any kind of, corruption in the process, because the money directly went to the bank accounts of this poor, and they can actually go out and be able to, buy their day-to-day food and water and so forth, electricity. And also the other thing the government did, they actually provided food, building, free housing to poor people. In fact, we have people that is actually part of our family. I mean, she has been working, in our house. She is actually part of the extended family. They all got house built by the Modi government, and it had nothing to do in terms of religion. If you're a Hindu, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Christian, if you're a Sikh, no, there was no such pattern. It was completely based on your economic well-being. So if you're financially depressed, we'll help you. And what the government did, they didn't give you the money up front. They'll give you part of the money, they'll see the progress, and they'll come back in 2 or 3 months and see how the progress has happened. And once they see enough progress, they'll come back and give the rest, and they can have a tenement, which they never dreamed of in their lifetime. So I mean, it's nothing fancy. It could be a 2-room, house instead of being a mud and thatched house. It could be a 2-room concrete room with a bathroom. Nothing fancy for the US standard.
And I was shocked most by the per capita GDP figures, but not to understate it, India is a very large country, right? So you're distributing that across very many people, many of them in very remote, poverty-stricken areas. Dr. Newnham, also from Penn State, board member of the World Affairs Council, asks if there's any prospect of slowing the population growth, and does the growth undermine the hopes of raising that per capita GDP?
I think the hopes of reducing population growth, especially in a democratic system, doesn't quite work. Indira Gandhi instituted emergency, I think in early 70s, and that completely backfired because she wanted to have a one-child policy, and it was a disastrous. That policy has disastrous effect, so it didn't go anywhere. And you cannot tell people that you cannot have more than one kid. Still we are a democratic system.
Sure.
Unfortunately, we have a similar. We have a little twist to the story. Most educated and people of privilege, they only seems to have. Most of my friends back in India, with the exception or 1 or 2, everybody has one child, because they think it's very difficult to raise kids. They cannot even think of having more than one kid, at best 2. And when you go down the ladder in terms of economic scale, the poorer you are, the more kids you tend to have.
It is because,
and that has been the truth. And the reason why the GDP per capita GDP is low, if you put close to 3 trillion and divide it by 1.38 billion, it makes the number looks terribly small, and that's exactly what's happening.
And because it's so geographically spread out and so much of the country is very rural and sparsely sparsely populated, that's easy to understand. But at the same time, the GDP growth, the GDP growth is also very slow. Is there a connection? What's the relationship between the population and population growth and then the GDP growth, or is that driven primarily by the urban areas?
I think most of the GDP growth has been attributed to service sector. When I left India 30 years ago, the agriculture, 70% of Indian economy was based on agriculture. Now it's less than 17%, and services sector is almost close to 60%. So it's IT, is, when you call 800 numbers, is the IT, is the tech, the software. That's what is providing growth, fostering economic growth in India, and also a lot of industrialization in terms of consumer items like automobiles. India has a huge manufacturing sector in terms of automotive, cranes, heavy equipment, and all of that. So that has definitely helped.
And I'm, related to the current situation, we're obviously working from home. A lot of that outsourced service industry probably can continue to be up and running during, this pandemic outbreak. So maybe that is it fair to say that could almost be good for India's economy, that those particular industries, because they're already outsourced, could be less affected, or is that not true?
I think, most of the call centers, if people can remotely log in, and most of, as long as we're isolated, I think most of those industries, in my assessment, is going to do well, because, we need more of those services, we need more of those support, and that's definitely going to help or bolster.
Do you believe they had the adoption of technology and the infrastructure to be able to, as a call center could be pretty densely populated, can consider that a high-risk area? Do you think they had the ability for people to work more remotely, or is it more that call center environment?
I think what I would surmise is call center may not be a very safe place, because you have too many people sitting in close quarters. But if they can, like what we have done here, if they can remotely zoom in or log in or whatever ways they do it, I think it is doable. And I think one of the challenges in the early part of Indian economy, from 1947 almost up to 1990s or early or mid 1980s, was infrastructure. We did not have any infrastructure. We basically had a road going from Dhaka to Pathankot, which is part of Western, which was established like 1,000 years ago. It's called the Grand Trunk Road, and that was the one major infrastructure we had that was built, almost 1,000 years ago. And then during the British Raj, what they did, they only connected the big cities like city of Calcutta, Madras, which is Chennai, Mumbai, and Delhi, with their ports. So that was designed to either extract raw materials from the hinterland and also to mobilize troops. Other than that, there were not much infrastructure in terms of roadways. So one of the things that the BJP government, not Modi, his predecessor, Atal Bihari Vajpayee did, he built the Golden Quadrilateral. So, India is a diamond-shaped country. So they connected north, south, east, west like a diamond. So they built the 4 national highways, and that actually created a lot of jobs and also, promoted a lot of economic growth, facilitated all kinds of transport and commerce.
Yeah, and so again, from Dr. Newnham, do you have a sense of the impact of the pandemic, coronavirus, on particularly the poor population? How has India dealt with it? Have they been able to flatten the curve? What are we still seeing there?
India is, my twin brother, he lives in Calcutta or Kolkata. They are in a lockdown, and lockdown is serious situation. It's not like Berks County, you cannot leave home. all you can do is go to the grocery store or go to pharmacy. Otherwise, the cops will, they use batons to hit your rear. So that's what happens. You cannot leave home. As a matter of fact, I was looking in some of the local news, in some of the Indian news, the extent of unemployment in India is actually 125 million. 125 million people have rendered unemployed, and a lot of them are day laborers. So there are migrants from West Bengal, where I'm from Bengal. They go and work in, maybe in New Delhi, maybe in Chennai, maybe in Bangalore, because they have better wages, they have a better livelihood, so they would all migrate. And then once the lockdown was, once the government announced the lockdown 5 weeks ago, there were no ways for them to get back, and that created a lot of issues, for the current government, because there was not. So there was a lot of criticism about the Modi government. The government is sending, flights overseas to bring rich Indians back, but here we are struggling, the migrant workers, in different parts of India, they are locked, they have been kicked, either they lost their livelihood, job, they could not pay their rent, so they were kicked out of their, houses. There is no food, there's no water, and here you're not doing much for bringing the migrant workers to their home state. So I heard a lot of sad stories, sad commentary on that.
Yeah, and it's tough to come to terms with the devastation of this pandemic. Sometimes I feel like the only consolation is that we're all in the same boat together. So hopefully we find a path out here before too much longer.
But I think one of the good things that is going on, especially in urban centers in India, they have contact tracing. So everybody who has a smartphone is actually have to have download the app, and you can actually figure out what areas are, if people have COVID-19 or what areas are red alert. So you get the instant message on your phone, which actually helps to maybe, reduce it to a certain extent. But given the extent of poverty and, especially the poorer segment, I mean, you have one room where 5 people live. How can you manage a 6-foot distance or social distancing? So there are some challenges, and I think the government is doing, whatever they can to minimize the effect of COVID-19 and the spread of COVID-19. Yeah. But again, I mean, we are far ways off.
Sure. Yeah. I think maybe we don't even know how far. In the video, they mentioned immigration and how the current effort of the United States is to lock down on immigration from all the European countries, South America, Africa, Asia. Malika Richards asks through the chat, what do you see as the future of educated Indians coming to study and work in the U.S.?
This is, depending on what the government does between now and in the next year or so. This is definitely going to be an issue for some of the educated, Indian community that would like to go abroad, expand their knowledge, and hopefully, return and help the bigger economic system. But we have also seen that, the H-1B visa that has been issued, there have been a lot of abuses. So there were a lot of, companies like Infosys, the TCS, which is called Tata Consultancy, and there were some of the smaller ones. There were a lot of mushroom IT companies. So some of the bigger ones actually followed all the US protocol, but there were a lot of smaller mushroom companies which took advantage of this H-1B system, and there were a lot of underqualified or unqualified personnel that somehow fell through the system and came to the US. So there has to be some checks and balances along the way.
I kind of wonder now, hearing you talk through that, now that we've all kind of learned that a lot of the jobs we thought had to be done in an office can actually be done from home, if it makes it even easier to fill those service jobs without coming to the U.S., where we still could see some benefit of that remote work that's already taking place.
If I can make a comment on the education system, when I was growing up, education was completely merit based. So if you have money and if you didn't get in, too bad, you didn't get in. But now, at the same time, that was too restrictive. So what we have done in the last 30 years, there have been a lot of private colleges, engineering schools, and other universities that have been established. But some of them are not as great as you would think. And we have also seen that the same thing we have seen in our Chinese student body in the US. When I came to the US, most of the Chinese students that came in, they came from a very different economic cohort. And now, some of the kids that come in, the second week they drive a BMW, and some of them could not actually get into some of the good universities in China, and their parents have enough money so they can come to the schools in the US.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming to share your knowledge and experience with us today, Dr. Ghosh.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to bring our president, Lynn, back into the presentation here.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh and Mike. We appreciate all you've done for us today and a great presentation. Just want to send out a note for all of you to renew membership or to join us in becoming a member of the World Affairs Council. It's the lifeline for our programs, and if you go to our website at wacreading.com, you can see more information about upcoming programs and all the work we're doing to bring some really prominent programs to the forefront. Speaking of that, on June 3rd, we'll have a presentation on the Great Decisions series. It'll be on the Red Sea. Dr. Randall Fegley, who's with us today, I believe, who is a professor at Penn State and a political historian, will be joining us for that session and speaking on that topic. And then on the 10th, and that's at 7 o'clock in the evening. On the 10th of June, they'll have a presentation on COVID-19 from Marie Kime, who is the Infection Prevention Officer at the Tower Health System. And that's another great program. Also, we've just booked a program for the 24th of June at noon. We're having Dr. Chris Miller, who's from Tufts University. He's written a book entitled Putinomics, Power and Money in a Resurgent Russia. And we're delighted that he'll be joining us. Thanks so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next week and in the next couple of weeks on our special programs that we're providing during this interesting time we're all living through. Stay well and stay safe. Thank you.